Welcome.
Yes. Oh, no, it's fine.
Okay. Before I sort of say some just brief remarks, and I want to thank the Office of Public Defender, my colleague and partner, Public Defender Dartigue, for hosting us here today. She said that you've had this place for how long?
About 9 years.
9 years. We've coveted it for the last 17 months. We at the OAG, we like to have facilities where it exists, but you put out good folks in this facility. Before I say any more, we're going to go around the room and everyone can introduce themselves, name, organization, get some introductions so everyone knows who's in.
Good morning, I'm Willie Flowers, OPD. Good morning, Christian Lee, also Attorney General.
Good morning, Phil Biggis, Office of the Attorney General.
Debbie Levy, Office of the Public Defender. Heather Warnken, Center for Criminal Justice Reform at the University of Baltimore Law School.
Stuart Nathan, Office of the Attorney General.
Carl Pothier, Office of the Attorney General.
Erin Seegears, Office of the Public Defender.
Elizabeth Hilliard, Office of the Public Defender.
Camille Blake Farrell, Maryland Department of Health. Terry Green, Maryland Office of the Public Defender.
Sharice Cass, Time Organization.
Alex Williams, the AW Assembly.
Michelle Martz, Maryland Criminal Defense Attorneys Association.
I could win and toss it.
Hi, everyone. Jason Perkins, Cohen, Maryland Department of Labor.
Vinnie Schiraldi, Maryland Department of Juvenile Services.
Melissa Price, Maryland Office of the Public Defender.
Leonard Howie, Office of the Attorney General.
Deborah Carr, Job Opportunities Task Force.
Good morning, Katie Dorian, Office of the Attorney General.
Karen Freeman, U.S. Department of Justice.
Sean Mukherjee, Office of the Public Defender.
Phil Karoom, Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform.
Janae Fountain, Office of the Attorney General.
Michael Bernard, Gibson Bank Center for Race and the Law, University of Maryland, Carey School of Law.
Brian Sassani, Office of the Public Defender.
Bernard Brooks, Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services.
Karen Piper Mitchell, Maryland States Attorneys Association.
Good morning, Charles Adams, Bowie State University.
Lou Giesel, Administrative Office of the Courts.
Melanie Shaw, Judge Court of, Appellate Court of Maryland.
We'll go in the back as well.
We have some friends.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody might as well.
Good morning, Musa Eubanks, Office of the Attorney General.
Hi, I'm Chris Sweeney. I'm with Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service.
Good morning, everyone. Angelique Salzan, Special Assistant to Secretary Lopez at the Maryland Department of Human Services.
Good morning, Janine Johnson. I'm with the Office of Attorney General.
Alan Dunklow, Office of the Attorney General.
Zach Alberts, the Center for Urban Families.
Ellen Rappaport, Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services.
Good morning, Thomas Lester, Office of the Attorney General.
Good morning, Tony Shartner, Office of the Attorney General.
Good morning, Margie Joshi, Juvenile Justice Monitoring Unit.
Good morning, Rob DeRocher from the Office of the Attorney General.
Good morning, Sophia Sige from the Office of the Attorney General. Adria Obonio, Office of the Attorney General. Melissa Rothstein, Office of the Public Defender.
Zanita Wickham Hurley, Office of the Attorney General.
Andrew Lee, Office of the Attorney General.
Good morning, Isabel Malizia, Law Clerk with the Office of the Public Defender.
William Ford, Maryland Matters. Good morning.
I think that's all.
Good morning, Keith Lottridge, Office of the Public Defender.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us at this meeting of the collaborative. I should remind everyone in the room that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded. And as the work group leaders know and work group participants, we've had a really busy spring, and I want to thank each of you for your diligence, your hard work, your attention and commitment to the issues that your work groups are wrestling with or addressing. We also want to thank the Judge Groom and your team that you're working with and leading, teeing up for us what I think we could consider one of the first successes of the collaborative, which was supporting the correctional ombudsman, which the legislature passed and the governor signed into law this spring. So we're really excited. We're excited about the launch of the collaborative's website. So if you haven't visited, please do so. It's mejc.maryland.gov. Certainly am interested in hearing your thoughts, your feedback on how we can improve the website. And I want to thank Willie and Christian for your work on that and just sort of keep the trains running on time. Kicking off our meeting today, we're going to hear from colleagues, I guess, or peers in Massachusetts. Benjamin Foreman, who is the research director from Mass Inc., and Michael Coolho, the Deputy Commissioner of Probation at the Massachusetts Probation Service. And we're hearing from them because Massachusetts released a 5-year progress assessment of Massachusetts criminal justice reform efforts, and what they observed and what they were able to report on is over the past 10 years, Massachusetts reduced its incarceration at a rate that was twice the national average. So we're looking forward to hearing from them both about their successes and the challenges that they continue to face in Massachusetts. Before I turn it over to the folks from Massachusetts, I do just want to emphasize that right now our current top priority is to produce a quality, data-rich, data-driven inaugural annual report at the end of the year that will be chock full of narrative, a description of how we got to where we are, and perhaps as if not more important, a host of recommendations on where we go from here. So I'm looking forward to that and looking forward to hearing from each of the work groups today as you present one of those 5 to 7 recommendations that we've asked you to submit by this month. And again, we ask that your presentation today be on a recommendation, not the recommendation that you presented last month, but another recommendation. So we look forward to hearing that. And again, thanks to the work group co-chairs and members and volunteers for all their hard work. And with that, I'll turn it over to Christian and then turn it over to wherever we're going from here.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Benjamin, I believe you guys can go ahead and get started.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Can I pull up a few slides to share?
Yes, can someone make Benjamin the co-host, please? Or if you're not, if you don't already have sharing privileges.
It looks like I can share. Are you able to see the?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Mass Inc. is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy research organization. We work on state issues. Criminal justice is one of our bread and butter issues. We also work on housing, transportation, economic development. We're nonpartisan, founded in 1996. Our very first report was on criminal justice issues. And I kind of shudder to read that report now with some of the misguided ideas it advanced. Over the last 10 years, we've been trying to help the state adjust its posture and adopt more evidence-based approaches. And so this report, the culmination of that work was a bill passed in 2018, or 2 bills actually, that brought comprehensive criminal justice reform to Massachusetts. So we just recently did a study looking at what's happened in the 5 years since that law passed. And I'll just share you some of that context, background, and findings, and then turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Coelho, who, has probably been the foremost or one of the foremost leaders on the ground within the agencies leading this work, and I think is much better positioned to tell you what's really happened. And also, I think he has a much better pulse of how we compare to other states and what we've learned from other states and what's worked here and what we found more challenging. So anyhow, just I'll give you a little bit of the background on what our criminal justice reform policies have looked like over the last decade and how we see them influencing trends in incarceration and in crime. And a big part of our story is, the justice reinvestment formula, slowing or reducing correctional expenditure and reinvesting those resources in communities and prevention and rehabilitation and other more productive allocations. So anyhow, I don't know if you know the history of Massachusetts, but we've always been a fairly low incarceration state. We were a particularly low incarceration state in the 80s until our governor decided to run for president and had the Democratic nomination. And then somebody who was released on furlough committed a horrific murder. And that Willie Horton case became part of the presidential contest. And I think it is an example that everybody has looked at nationally in terms of using crime in a really racist way, in a way that creates fear and bad public policy. And so, we like much of the rest of the country, adopted tough on crime laws and tripled our incarceration rates in the 80s and 90s. And didn't do much about that until 2010 was the first kind of effort we've had to reverse our course and take a step back. The law was our 2010 law was most notable for ban the box and trying to address quarry problems, but it also did reduce some mandatory minimum drug sentences for the first time in 30 years. Instead of increasing penalties, we took a step back and reduced them. Around the same period, we started to make pretty significant investments in public health-based approaches to crime prevention. The Safe and Successful Youth Initiative created funding for community organizations all across the state to provide services to proven risk youth and really intensively work with them to help create alternatives and put them on a better path. Then in 2012, we actually did a bit of both. We passed a 3 strikes law, which was really offensive to the reformers at a time when a lot of states were realizing how 3 strikes laws had contributed to dramatic increases in incarceration. We adopted one, but it was a pretty narrow one, and we coupled it with very significant increases, reductions to mandatory minimums for certain drug offenses. So I think on balance, that 2012 law started to help reduce incarceration. And right around this time, our reform group started to get very active and very collaborative. We had a pretty small but vocal reform community, but it started to grow and bring in unusual suspects, including a number of prior state and federal prosecutors who believed that we had gone too far with mandatory minimums, and our approaches to incarceration were creating lots of recidivism and not reducing the likelihood that people would reoffend. We didn't bring in the Council on State Governments or the Federal Justice Reinvestment Program until 2015. We were one of the late states to that process. And when we did bring in their technical assistance, our governor really wanted it to be narrowly focused on reducing recidivism. So we didn't do a complete review of our criminal justice system in all the ways we could reduce incarceration. It was pretty narrowly focused, which was pretty upsetting to many of the advocates and helped rally them to push the legislature to go further than the governor was willing to at that time. Our ACLU got very active and started running What a Difference a DA Makes campaigns, which led to progressive prosecutors taking office, especially in Boston, and helped sort of break the unified stance of DAs at that time that any reform was going to bring us backwards, and that there was nothing wrong with mandatory minimums and the racial disparities that they were clearly creating. That that message was no longer something that the legislature heard loudly and clearly anymore. with some of the work led by the ACLU. And, all this momentum brought us up to this 2018 reform law. And again, there are actually two laws. One was a comprehensive one passed by the legislature, which included decriminalizing some offenses, clarifying diversion. On pretrial, we reduced cash bail. Part of that was because we actually had our state Supreme Court said cash bail was illegal. So around this time, we stopped using cash bail. But the law also codified that judicial decision. We reduced sentence lengths, but we did enhance sentences as well at the same time for fentanyl and carfentanil. We significantly reduced parole and probation fees. We changed our criminal record sealing laws so you could seal earlier and expunge some juvenile offenses. And we passed pretty significant data transparency provisions requiring all the criminal justice agencies, courts, corrections, parole, probation, to all create a longitudinal data system so we could follow people through and get a much better understanding of where racial disparities were entering the system and how we could ferret them out. At the same time, we did have that justice reinvestment process going on, and that led to a consensus bill which was much narrower, but I think actually had quite a bit of impact because, we had a lot of people sentenced under mandatory minimums, and there was, a day difference between their maximum and their minimum sentence. And because of that, they weren't participating in programs. They had no incentive to release early. They were releasing without supervision, especially, those were a higher risk, were often more likely to have those mandatory minimums and release without supervision. And so we created lots of incentives to earn good time and complete programs and to release under supervision that seemed to have been pretty impactful. So the research that we did earlier this year looked at how the law led to reductions in incarceration, what it has meant for racial disparities, since one of the main objectives was to reduce large racial disparities, especially the ones that were created by the mandatory minimum frameworks that we had. And then, has Massachusetts made alternative investments to incarceration to try and increase public safety and heal the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by very high rates of incarceration? So, is this formula of less incarceration, more justice reinvestment leading to more public safety? That was kind of our key research question. So here, just to give you a kind of glimpse of the patterns that we see in the high level data, I mentioned Massachusetts has very low incarceration rates relative to the rest of the country. A decade ago, our per incarceration rate was less than half of the national average, but we've been able to make it fall even further from that low base and steadily, whereas the rest of the country saw a fairly large drop as we decarcerated during the peak COVID years and then quickly started to rise again. Massachusetts has continued to fall further. And, we were dropping, if you look here on the right, indexing these two so you compare them to the moment of reform. Prior to reform, we were falling faster than the rest of the country after we did that 2012 reform law. Then things leveled out. Our incarceration was falling roughly at the same pace as the rest of the country. And then you can see here, post-reform, our pattern of decline accelerated faster than the rest of the country. Looking at the picture by race and ethnicity, the story's not perfect by any means. Our Black incarceration rates are less than half the national average. Our Hispanic incarceration rates are about 60% of the national average, and our white incarceration rates are much less than half the national average. So for all races and ethnicities, Massachusetts does incarcerate less than the rest of the country. But if you look at the picture here, since 2017, our white incarceration rate has fallen particularly sharply. Our Black incarceration rate is steadily trending downward, but about half the rate of our white incarceration rate. And our Latino incarceration rate has fallen, but then it started to rise coming out of the COVID recovery. So our racial disparities all in all have gotten wider, which was, the whole, I think, motivation for reform was to reduce them. But again, we have reduced incarceration rates for all racial and ethnic groups, so progress, but significantly more work to do. And I think one of the big questions everybody's asking, having reduced incarceration by more than half in just 10 years, what has this meant for crime in Massachusetts? If you look 10 years ago, our violent crime rate was higher than the national average. And it has fallen to about the national average right around when we did these reforms. And since the reforms, it has fallen well below the national average. And just the last year or so of data, we started to see an uptick. But I think this has actually changed direction again. So we're now falling at least at the rate of the nation. This does vary by community. And it's, some of these local data on crime are really difficult because they swing wildly, and some of that may be because of what's actually happening on the ground, but a lot of it could just be in changes in data collection. There's been a lot of changes in how people report data to the FBI over this period. But I think we know for certain that, Boston in particular has seen very sharp reductions in violent crime. This year may well be the city's safest on record. We've only had, I think, 4 or 5 homicides up to halfway through the year now. So we may be on pace to set a record in the city of Boston. But some of our other cities outside of Boston, have seen pretty significant upticks in crime. Some may have the highest they've ever seen in homicides. So, it's not a neat and clean story. There are very significant differences in these patterns that I think it's important for people to take note of and understand. On the property crime side, we have seen very sharp and very steady decreases in property crime, especially relative to the national average. And this is something that was kind of hotly debated because one of the key pieces of the reform law changed the thresholds for felony larceny, in large part to try and make sure that people didn't have long quarries. And there was a lot of concern that had led to additional shoplifting in Massachusetts. We've seen shoplifting issues across the country post-COVID, and Massachusetts has certainly had its share of those, but there's no indication that our reforms have disproportionately contributed to them in any way. Just a little sort of finer grain look at what's happening in terms of different subgroups. When you look at the arrest level, we've seen sharper decreases post-reform for adults than we have for youth, and very, as I noted before, sharper decreases post-reform for white residents as compared to residents of color. And, the most notable drop is the reductions in the arrest for drug crimes. There really, I think, has been a trend to decriminalize a lot of drug charges and focus heavily on fentanyl trafficking. I think part of the youth story here, which is particularly interesting for us, because there's been a lot of focus on young adult justice and emerging adults and trying to keep them out of the adult system. Massachusetts had done a whole lot of reform in the juvenile system prior to 2018. So I think in some ways there was less ground for us to gain there. And some of the gains we're probably seeing on the adult side are a result of us doing much better work with youth for the last decade or more. On the other hand, I think we certainly have had some challenges with youth, as all communities have, with the COVID disruptions and things slowly getting back to normal. And on the charging side, we have data for the post-reform period that are comparable. It's hard to go back further than that, but these confirm that we're seeing larger reductions in drug crimes than anything else. We are seeing some concerning upticks in firearms offenses in the community. And these, show the racial disparities by charge. We have achieved what we wanted to, I think, when it comes to drug offenses and those creating large racial and ethnic disparities, but there seem to be very large disparities in motor vehicle offenses and who's being charged with those crimes, as well as property crimes and weapon offenses. Just the last sort of thing on the pattern we've seen, I mentioned we really worked hard to reduce drug crimes. A big part of that was eliminating the school zone enhancements in Massachusetts, and some increases in the mandatory minimums for fentanyl. All in all, we saw a dramatic decrease in convictions for mandatory minimum offenses, much sharper decrease than other drug convictions. We've seen a slightly increase in the average sentence length with those enhancements for those who are being incarcerated for fentanyl trafficking. But overall, a dramatic difference in the number of person years of incarceration we're using for drug offenses, and allowing us to free up resources and use them in the community. So I just finished now with how we are investing in the community, because I think that's probably the most important part of the story in many ways. When you look at our pre-reform expenditure on things like reentry, crime prevention, housing assistance for people who are justice re-involved, efforts to reduce recidivism for young adults, it was less than $20 million a year. We've more than quadrupled that. Very large increases in all of these categories. We've seen a little bit of backtracking as budgets have gotten tighter, but I think, there is a fairly strong advocacy effort. All of this investment has created many more grassroots groups in the communities, many more voices to advocate for this kinds of investment. And I think it's going to be really important for those groups to be able to demonstrate results, and for the state to be really attentive to sustaining these line items, because these are the kinds of things that we have tended to sort of cut when budgets get tight, which is often, the worst time possible for communities who are trying to weather difficult economic periods. And then, lastly, I would say, a big part of our effort has been diversion to treatment, in trying to treat people in the community. And I think a lot of that work has been very successful. Where we're really struggling is long-term treatment beds. We haven't increased capacity there at all. So people who have serious mental illness and substance disorder challenges don't have any place to go, and we are certainly seeing them on the street and in the community, and that's creating significant challenges for cities that have large numbers of these individuals and lack the resources to really care for them. So that's the kind of the data view and what we've gathered. But again, I think Deputy Commissioner Coelho is a much better position to give you the inside story and answer questions that you may have.
Hey, Ben. Just if I could appeal to my hosts, my camera can't turn on. It says it's been disabled by the host, unless that's intentional. You don't want to see my face. I understand that completely.
Yeah, I had that same problem too, and they straightened me out right away. Okay. So you should be good, I bet. Momentarily.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you. So, Ben did a great job covering the timeline and some of the key things that happened in juvenile justice reform. Just to give you some background, my name is Mike Clough. I'm Deputy Commissioner for Programs. I've been in this position for 10 years at probation. Prior to that, I spent 11 years at the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, first doing legislative affairs, then as Chief of Staff, then as Assistant Secretary of Policy and Planning. The Executive Office of Public Safety and Security oversees the prison system, the state prison system, the parole board, sex offender registry, state police, as well as some other grant-making agencies that help get some of these initiatives started, like Shannon Grants and Safe and Accessible Youth Initiative. And so there's so many little things that happen to make this sort of engine go. One thing that Ben touched on was the improvements in the juvenile system as sort of our starting place. So back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, a series of reforms to reduce juvenile detention in the DYS system, introducing a validated tool in probation for risk-need responsivity. So it really changed our population. So it was kind of upside down, too many high risk, and the pyramid was going like this to low. Instead, we have, once we introduced a validated tool, we had a lot fewer high risk and more in the lower risk standards. A lot of work to decriminalize most interactions with juveniles. So to reduce that pipeline to the adult system, which is include this expansion of children requiring assistance category or care and protection orders, so that the interaction, even though they're still involved with probation, we partner with the Department of Children and Families to just try to help the children and the families stay intact and stay out of the criminal justice system as much as possible. So those, I think, things that have been very, very helpful. The different advocate groups and from some that I would characterize as sort of union-based, neighbor to neighbor, Boston Empowered, ex-prisoners organized for change, the Mass Community Action Network, Lou Finfer and his interfaith group. They got very organized to help, I think, push for change in the legislature. And I don't know if you have a similar sort of engine there in Maryland of folks that are doing something similar. And so they help spread the message for criminal justice reform. I can tell you a couple of things that happened during Governor Patrick's administration that really sort of were I think, impactful moments. Was this need to repair prison facilities, both at the sheriff's level and at the state level. And so the governor commissioned a correctional master plan to determine the costs and the projected growth in the populations if we didn't make changes to what we did in Massachusetts. And the cost was huge, well over $1 billion to build new facilities or repair facilities. And as you know, if you build these facilities, you generally fill them. And so I think that really got people more focused on where we were as a state and how do we reverse this trend of the increasing prison population in the 90s and 2000s. And so that led, I think, to the first bite at CORE reform. We had a setback, obviously, during this. There was a parolee who committed, he killed a police officer during a winter storm in 2010. That led to the parole board sort of suspended for a while. And that led to the DOC in Massachusetts jumping to its highest rate ever. Right before the 2012 law passed, we were well over 12,000 people in the Department of Correction, 145% of capacity. And so I think everyone saw that sort of precipice and really came together to work hard to try to change that. I can tell you in probation, in addition to sort of these initiatives, we've made a very conscious effort to reduce as much as possible our violation practice, so we didn't contribute to the prison population, and revoke people unnecessarily and try to keep them in the community under supervision. And so, there's been a couple of national briefs that ranked Massachusetts very low on that scale. The Pew Trust in September 2018, and then the Council State Governments Report of 2019, Confined and Costly, ranked Mass last in terms of supervision violations leading to state prison admissions. And a lot of what's driving that is obviously, adapting evidence-based practices, a better understanding of risk-need responsivity, trying to keep people in the community, engaged in treatment. We saw some of those investments in treatment beds here in Massachusetts, aside from the long-term placement. And then our workforce changed dramatically too. Starting under Commissioner Dolan in 2013, there was a conscious effort to hire people with social work backgrounds and case management experience. So actually hiring a lot from agencies like Department of Children and Families and hiring from other social services agencies. And so our population, our workforce changed. It made them more receptive to case management, case planning, and understanding those principles, and trying to work with people in the community where they are. And so I think those are some of the big things that contribute to this effort. The other, I think, significant thing to note, as Ben noted, the resources that were invested after criminal justice reform passed in 2018 required all the criminal justice agencies to work together to administer the resource. So even the funding came to the trial court, it's for everybody's use. And so, the legislature asked us to work with Mass Health to improve access to behavioral health resources for the justice involved. And so we partnered with Mass Health. We started an initiative called the Behavioral Health Initiative for the Justice Involved. Initially, it was just in 2 counties as a pilot. Based on the early success of that initiative, we were able to get funds to go statewide. Most of this is paid for by the Mass Health treatment dollars. I'm assuming, as Maryland expanded Medicaid, part of the the work done under the Obama administration, have they enlisted and used those dollars, those federal treatment dollars? I'm asking the question to the group. I'm assuming you did. I can't hear you. Yes? Okay, great. And so, Massachusetts, most of that is billable dollars to the federal government for treatment. 90% of the probation population is on Mass Health. But we kick in about $5 million to manage the program. And so we give the money to Mass Health. They partner with an offshoot of the UMass Medical. It's called 4Health Consulting now, but it used to be called Commonwealth Medicine. And they're affiliated with UMass Medical here in Massachusetts. They help manage the program. They have evaluators from UMass Medical, researchers evaluating the program. So it's extremely well run and well managed. And every other month, 90 people from across the state, criminal justice agencies, sheriffs, Department of Correction, probation, parole, Department of Mental Health, Department of Public Health, members of the Committee on Public Counsel Services. We all talk about the program. And so the funding's one thing, but one of the findings in the Justice Reinvestment Initiative effort from 2016 and 17 was the lack of good coordination in the justice system when people move from one part of it to another. And so I think requiring us to share the resource, co-manage it with Mass Health, and then Mass Health as a bureaucracy, as an entity, has done a lot of work since the Behavioral Initiative Justice Involved to expand and work with the federal government for different waivers to do more for the justice involved. And so they really carved out specific initiatives using Mass Health resources and federal government resources to help get behavioral health treatment to the justice involved. So after we went statewide in February 2022, we're at about 5,000 folks enrolled and about 7,000 referred. There's a difference in referred versus enrolled because it's a voluntary program. But the vendors are doing a great job engaging with them. That's about a 68% engagement rate. And so it's been great work with folks. I'm assuming this roundtable is trying to mimic some of that discussion, right? Across all the different agencies, talking to each other so that the coordination and the way you help people as they move through the system strengthens. Another big part of what we've done here in probation is the legislature gave us housing resources. And so both longer term housing, 6 months plus, transitional housing, targeted to those who are reentering from incarceration, but it's available to anyone in the community who's justice involved. So that includes folks who are on, pretrial status on probation or post-release, under community supervision. It's a resource being well used by parole. So one of the challenges that was sort of presented in the Justice Reinvestment Initiative was that people were getting parole votes, but then not meeting the conditions of their parole, right? So they're released with conditions. And one of those is an approved house plan. And so with this transitional housing now available, more folks have an approved house plan, so they're accessing discretionary parole, they're accessing early release. So it's a great job by our colleagues in the executive branch under parole and using that resource. We also have shorter term sober housing fund placements that we can do for anyone in the community who's justice involved. And then every other week, you know, myself, hey, ask questions. Sorry, I keep talking.
Oh, no, it's all right. I was going to say, if you didn't have anything you wanted to hit on, we did want to save some time for questions.
Yeah, I'll leave it there and just go ahead and ask questions. Yeah.
All right. Any questions, and we'll circulate the mics.
Dana or Michael, did you hear that question?
No, I couldn't hear the question. Sorry. I bet it was a great question, though. I bet it was awesome.
Okay, I'll make this short. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, great. I just wanted to ask you about whether there were any policy or practical changes that resulted in the drastic decrease in the number of Hispanics and Latinos who've been incarcerated in Massachusetts. I mentioned in the previous question that I know there's a lot of tension going on between immigration that's calling for incarceration versus the counties and the states that want to release. So did you all do anything that helped reduce that number of Hispanics being detained?
I asked anything specific that targeted the Latino population in Massachusetts to keep them out of the prison system. Is that something you're asking? Is that accurate? Did I restate the question accurately? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
In the mic, say yes.
Okay. So I can't say that was something specific. We've definitely had a lot more cultural competency training. It's actually a lot of it was led by our current commissioner. He's new to the role, Commissioner Pamerson Eiffel. He helped develop several trainings, including something we call here in Massachusetts called Seeing Red, red short for racial and equity and diversity. And so that's been one thing. Another thing we've done is diversify our workforce, especially at the entry-level positions, associate probation officer and probation officer. And so our communities, you know, our probation departments are looking more and more like the communities we serve. So those are some of the things we've done. But in general, I think the things that have helped the most is prioritizing folks who work for probation, who have a social work background, a social services background, a case management background. Those have helped get them so they're more receptive to the different evidence-based trainings when it comes to like the science of addiction, dealing with people with trauma, dealing with people with mental health challenges. And so our workforce, our probation workforce has done a tremendous job keeping people in the community as much as possible, because they know that's where the best opportunity for change can occur. And so even after the data cited by Ben, we looked at our 2023 violation rates, were down 45% from 2018. So it's dropped off even more significantly, even though in 2023, we're back to 90% of our caseload. So our violations went from 30,000 in 2018 to about 17,000 in 2023. 17,000 violations. Our ratio of violations is still something the commissioner wants to address. It's about a 2-to-1 ratio of non-criminal to criminal violations. And so it's one of his key priorities is to further reduce non-criminal violations and to use other things. But a very conscious effort over the last 10 years to change our workforce and to keep people in the community and not incarcerate them and hold them unnecessarily. I think when we look at our data, when someone is revoked, it's generally because the person has had a violent offense. There's a victim involved, and probation has exhausted their sort of ability to work with them. So on the average time before revocation is almost, it's over a year before it occurs in some of the data that we've seen. So, I think that's sort of been the key here.
Thank you both for this really helpful presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for the really helpful presentation and this really inspiring work. I'm hoping you can talk more about a standout theme throughout the report that you've both spoken to a little bit today that's so relevant to our work here at MEJC, where you have, of course, these tandem goals of reducing the population and reducing racial disparities. And without very dedicated efforts, they're not going to happen automatically together. And that oftentimes some of the more successful reductions in population actually exacerbate the racial disparities. But there's one piece in the report that I wanted to hone in on here that I thought was really interesting. It's talked about in various places, but in one place on page 19 around the role that data quality plays in this, that some of the challenges with data quality and consistency were playing a really big role, and then a corresponding recommendation around the next chapter, the reforms that have to do with accountability and follow-up to ensuring compliance on data quality issues throughout the state as essential to measuring this ongoing racial disparity exacerbation problem. So if you could share more about those lessons learned, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I can start on that. I think Mike knows a lot about data too, and we'll probably have to add. But part of the story for us in criminal justice reform was Massachusetts doesn't have a very representative legislature at all, and legislators of color, do not occupy positions of power in the legislature, in the leadership or committee chairs. It just so happens that the highest ranking African American legislature we ever had in the state's history took an interest in this and was particularly interested in using his clout to push for data transparency because he believed that was the only way we were ever going to get to the root of the racial disparities in the system. So he included in the law provisions that required these, as I mentioned, agencies to integrate their data so we could really look at somebody's entire journey and all their contacts. And I think the only other state that I've seen that has anything like that is Florida. I don't think Florida's implemented it very well. And we've, struggled to implement it. It's been 6 years and we're still not there yet, but we have made progress. And so we are able to break down all kinds of things by race, ethnicity, gender, age, and get a finer grained understanding of what's happening. But I'm not sure we're quite there on data quality. So it's hard to have faith in some of the things that we're seeing at this point. But, the fact that it's being reported, that it's being tracked is going to put us certainly on a path to improve data quality. And there continues to be a lot of interest in investing in these systems and improving these systems and relying on these systems to make better policy. So, I mentioned in the prep call we had for this that Maryland is a state that we look to because you have this entity called, I think it's the Maryland State Longitudinal Data Center that is interagency and independent from the agencies, and its whole mission is to collect and integrate cross-agency data. It's focused on tracking students from education into the workforce. but there's absolutely no reason at all why they couldn't build their portfolio and be an independent broker and facilitator of generating data from the justice system, so you could really understand its contact with the community and its performance.
Yeah, Ben captured that well. I can tell you specifically in our system, the basis of it is called mass courts. It's really a docketing system and a scheduling system. It's not a true case management system. We are in the process. We've selected a vendor to help us actually produce a true case management system. One of the major findings of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative report that was produced by the Council of Governments was how poor the data quality was in probation, across the board, but in probation. And so when we do this data analysis, it's generally sample-based and it's by hand. Like our researchers are reading files and coding. And so can be time-consuming and lengthy. The other challenge we have is how often the issue of race or ethnicity is not captured in our system. So it's gotten better. Older files from like 16, 17, and 18, you probably see about 13 to 18% of unknown in those categories. We're seeing newer files and it's dropped to more 6 or 7%. Still a persistent challenge with ethnicity when it comes to identifying Latino populations. That can still sometimes chip into the double digits, like 12 or 13% unknown. So that does skew our ability to understand disparity when you have that much unknown in the system. It's getting better, but it has a way to go. And we're hoping that our new case management system, along with some other better sort of consolidation of identity databases that's available to the state. So not just what we have in the trial court, but understanding, if someone has a registry motor vehicle, if other places where race might be captured. So you may have between federal, state, and local databases, 6 different entries into a person, but only one may have actually captured the race. Can we get access to that so that we understand who's before us and have it be more accurate?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
And my turn.
So you're good. He can hear you. He can hear you.
Okay. My question is, thank you for your work. I don't know what the buzzing is, but my question is, I'm a public defender, so I'm familiar with the convictions, the approximately 60,000 convictions that were undone in Massachusetts based on 2 separate drug lab scandals. And I'm curious as to, in this report, what are some of the reforms that may have contributed to these statistics in law enforcement? So were there increases in transparency or law enforcement accountability or prosecutor accountability that helped contribute to some of these hopeful statistics?
Ben, do you want to take a crack at that first, or?
Yeah, I mean, I should have mentioned when I showed that drop sort of pre-reform in the 2012 to 2014 period, I attributed to that 2012 three strikes law that was coupled with sentencing reductions for certain drug offenses. But there was also those drug lab scandal cases where they were spoiled, the convictions were overturned, people weren't incarcerated, or if they were released. So that definitely had an impact in that period as well. And I think, a lot of people did see that as all these folks didn't go off to prison and the sky didn't fall. We didn't have a crime wave as a result of that. And same with the COVID releases. And I think, the deputy commissioner could speak better to this, but in some cases we found better ways to support those individuals and learn from those successes and continue to take those approaches.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, during COVID, we saw a lot of pretrial folks held in jails come out onto supervision, and they did well in the community and didn't commit any additional offenses. It wasn't a crime wave, as Ben said. When it comes to the labs, I think one of the things that happened, right, is obviously those cases, I think coupled with the changes in mandatory minimums. So I think what goes to the lab are more significant, larger volume trafficking cases. And so smaller possession with intent to distribute, those cases aren't it takes forever for that to go through the lab because they're not as prioritized. And so I think that changes some of what occurs. And so folks, I think that helps, focus on just the most serious offenses and, less nonviolent offenders who may be, dealing to support their habit are treated differently by the justice system and are plugged into treatment instead.
We'll do two more questions after Elizabeth.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I think this question may be for the deputy commissioner. I was wondering, you mentioned reducing reincarceration for non-criminal violations of probation. When you spoke to the trainings, culturally competent trainings, trauma-informed care trainings, was that directed specifically at probation agents? Did you incorporate courts? Was this a result of probation agents filing less violation of probation reports, or the courts making more lenient decisions with violation of probations?
Yeah, I think it's a partnership between us and the judges. And so I think when we look at some of the data, if a violation is found, sometimes it's, what we find occurring more and more is that it's a way to reset the conditions and sort of to reflect where the person is and not necessarily lead to revocation or incarceration. And so I think that's also something a lot of the judges here, actually all the judges today are being trained in we have a new iteration of substance use and mental health standards that have been promulgated by the Supreme Judicial Court. Almost all the judges in the state are out of training on those standards. And so they codify, I think, a lot of the practice of the last 10 years where folks, understand the role that behavioral health plays in behavior and the value in making sure those folks access treatment in the community. And so I think it's a combination of both the probation officers and the judges being more open to this training, understanding the value of connecting people when appropriate to treatment, showing good judgment about when to keep them in the community. And then, if all avenues are exhausted and the person's a danger to themselves and to the public, then maybe having to do a revocation. We did a sample of 8,000 sample of violations in Massachusetts and tried to determine how many related to substance use disorder violation. We're able to find only 4 revocations out of the 8,000 sample due to only a substance use disorder violation. Now, those 4, 2 were sort of DUIs with a reckless endangerment of a child. Another one was a violent offense, a domestic violence offense. And so we're seeing that judges in general, when a violation comes forward, are either resetting the conditions and keeping them in the community, withdrawing the violation, continuing probation. So the judges here and the probation officers are both showing, I think, a better judgment when it comes to when to keep someone in the community and engaged in treatment and to avoid incarceration.
I believe you both mentioned how earlier juvenile justice reform had an impact on the overall positive change that you saw in the adult system. Could you speak to maybe a couple pieces, specific juvenile justice reform that helped with those numbers?
I didn't catch the end of the question. I'm sorry. I heard, and it's the juvenile justice reforms and their impact, but what was the end of the question?
Yes, if you could share specifically what reform in the juvenile system you believe most help drive the positive numbers in the adult system.
Yeah, it's a probably combination of things. One is the decriminalization of offenses and interactions with juveniles. And the switch to a category called children requiring assistance, and sort of discouraging the arrests of juveniles and trying to keep them, helping them with other resources. So that the federal government, Massachusetts, participated in the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, JDAI, in the 2000s, continues to do that. The state legislature passed juvenile justice reform that helped, and I can send you a link to the different bills that help decriminalize many interactions with juveniles, created that category of children requiring assistance, which actually dominates our work in juvenile probation. You know, the number of folks actually sentenced to probation in the juvenile system is very low. Same with people who are ordered to the Department of Youth Services, either for supervision or commitments. Most of the juveniles we interact with, young people, are children requiring assistance or what's called a care and protection order. And I think those things have really helped. Our challenge always, as you do this work, is making sure that there are resources in the community, especially mental health treatment, available to these folks so that they continue to stay in the community and don't get involved in the justice system. And so that is a challenge we have. You know, Ben cited some of the challenges of the long-term beds, but mental health treatment in Massachusetts is tough to access. Even with the mass health benefit, we don't have enough providers. It's a challenge for everyone in Massachusetts, not just the justice involved, to access mental health treatment. So it is a challenge here for that. But I'd probably say the creation of the Children Requiring Assistance (CRA) Act is probably one of the biggest things that helped change that sort of pipeline to the adult system.
Well, Mike and Ben, thank you very much for sharing your candor and your insights today. So thank you for joining us, and we'll say goodbye this time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to transition into the work group presentations. I'll turn it over to Christian, Willie, and Kelly. You want to handle this and our 7 work groups.
So thank you. Brianna put together a PowerPoint for us to organize the presentations. We are pulling up a short timer. Each group will have 2 minutes, but we're going to start with education, workforce development, economic opportunity. When co-chairs, when you do come up, you can present right where Brianna's standing right now.
Timer. But I need a microphone. Am I okay without a microphone? Do I need a microphone? Yes, you do need a microphone.
Yes, because you have we're streaming. Yeah.
You guys have your. Yeah. Okay. Here you go. Okay. Good morning. We, the Workforce Education and Economic Opportunities Work Group, we're happy to be here today, joined by co-chairs Deborah Carr, Melissa Price, and our sub-work chairs, Janine Johnson and Chris Sweeney. The issue that we're presenting today involves the intersection of delinquent acts and school discipline. There is a requirement that school officials have that's laid out in COMAR, and that is to inform law enforcement and parents when a delinquent act occurs. Currently, delinquent acts are being defined as those acts that if an adult were to commit them, they would actually be a crime. The issue that we're seeing is that in 2 jurisdictions in particular, in Worcester and in Calvert counties, we're seeing spikes in the referral of delinquent acts through the criminal justice system being processed through the school resource officers. So what our work group is going to do is we're recommending a 2-part examination into this issue. One is to revise COMAR regulations to clearly define what constitutes a delinquent act, because clearly we're starting to see more and more advancements in this area for conduct that has historically been treated as school-based discipline. The second revision involves looking at the Maryland guidelines for state code of discipline. It has not been updated since 2014, and we think that there's a better way to lay out a set of guidelines that will guide how school districts align their discipline procedures. Our stakeholders obviously include MSDE, DJS, Maryland Center for School Safety, Maryland State's Attorneys Association, Sheriff's Association, and local school systems. We're optimistic, so we do believe that this can be done within the first year. Some of the key obstacles would be that once you start identifying a list of conduct, you're going to leave something out. So we have to be really conscious of doing that. And also just the knowledge that school-based issues, disciplinary issues are a problem. They're a public concern, so we want to tread carefully but thoughtfully.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
Questions, yeah.
Can we run a mic? We need to run a mic. It's because we're streaming.
Is part of the proposal including the use of restorative circles, restorative justice in lieu of traditional discipline?
Right now, we're not looking at what type of discipline would be used. Right now, we're just examining whether it is, to what extent it is occurring. But clearly, when you start talking about alternatives to school-based discipline or even within the system, those other options would come into play.
So I just comment in the blueprint for Maryland Futures and other proposals in the works, there is that, which fits very well with what you're proposing.
Yeah, just to echo what Judge Karoum said, the Justice Department put out a lot of research on the impact of restorative practices in reducing not only violence, but also expulsions. And so I just want to echo what Judge Karoum said, but also, have you yet examined the data that the Maryland Department of Education put out about the arrests and racial disparities? It just came out like a week or so ago. Pretty extreme.
Yes, there were about the 2022-23 school year. We see there were about 1,500 arrests. About 900 were Black students, 400 white, 150 Hispanic, 150 other. So we see the disparities alive and well there.
And by school districts too, some crazy numbers in some school districts. Not all, but some.
Questions?
Okay, thanks, Leonard. Yep, all right.
Prison, jail, detention.
So for the prison jail detention reform work group, we had our favorite proposal from last time that we're asked not to repeat, which is for geriatric medical parole. And we think we understand what happened to that proposal, which is very valuable one. But our new top priority is for creation of emerging adult pilot programs in our state prison system. This is a program that has taken hold in, I think, at least 7 other states and the District of Columbia, where youthful offenders who otherwise might be considered the highest risk group and also the most likely to recidivate are gathered together in a more therapeutic and humane unit where they have a little bit more control over their daily lives and management. They have a little bit more in terms of education and treatment resources, and peer mentors are involved in discipline issues so that discipline does not have to result in violence or solitary confinement. When all of these components are gathered together in programs that have been used, again, very successfully in a number of states, they find that the incidence of violence, disciplinary troubles drop by more than 90%, and that recidivism when folks are released also substantially drops. They find that correctional officers are themselves incredibly supportive of this and are applying to transfer in to the emerging adult units. And that is all we have. We think this can be done with existing resources, and so it can be implemented in a matter of months with appropriate training. Any questions?
Great idea.
Yep.
Promote successful reentry.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Sassani. I'm one of the co-chairs, together with Janae Feldman and Melvin Wilson of the Promoting Successful Reentry Committee. I want to begin by thanking the members of our work group for their dedication and their time. We're fortunate to have a pretty large committee of about 30, I think actually maybe close to 40 people. And one of the things that we've noticed in the course of our meetings is the productivity of these discussions. We're fortunate to have Department of Public Safety leadership who are focused on reentry and preparing people to leave the prisons and be successful on the outside. We're fortunate to have leaders from the reentry community on the outside. And one of the things that we have come up with to propose to the group is to create the working name is a reentry collaborative, a group consisting of reentry leadership from the department together with reentry organizations in the community around Maryland that would meet quarterly. And the purpose would be essentially to update each other on the initiatives that are being taken within the department by the community organizations, and to also share concerns or places where we're hopeful that we can help one another. And so we're thinking a Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services reentry leader would be a co-chair of this, along with a representative of a community organization dedicated to reentry. We really think this will improve communication between these groups that both are doing good things and sometimes aren't aware of what each other is doing and how we can plug in. So unless anyone has any questions. And I'm getting the time. All right. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Other questions? Yeah.
Hi. Okay. When you are, is this vision going to the reentry collaborative, as I think you're calling it, love it. Would that include individuals who are currently incarcerated and working, like doing, I just blanked on what it's called when the work release, and other like reentry step down pieces, or would it be focused primarily on community reentry after they have been released from incarceration?
I think that it could include both. I think a lot of community organizations do include people who are themselves returned citizens and have been impacted by the system. But I do think that figuring out a way to include people that are currently going through the process is an excellent one. Yes.
Brian, How are you? Are you including the parole commission in this discussion to try to get some coordination to hopefully move that process forward?
I think that's an excellent suggestion. We do not have a representative of the parole. I don't think we have currently a representative of the parole commission on our work group. So that discussion has not happened yet. But I do think that's an excellent suggestion. It makes a lot of sense here since they are kind of a conduit for quite a number of people being released.
Hi, sounds like a really good idea. The only thing I would ask, if you haven't done or we could do, is just to do a quick scan to see what other coalitions are already out there to make sure we're not totally duplicating or half duplicating something that's already going on, but totally like.
Excellent.
And I'll piggyback on that, only that many may have seen that just recently the governor vetoed a bill. And when you look at it, you're like, whoa, why would he veto that? But if you read the veto message, it's because it's duplicative. So anything and everything that we do, we should have an eye towards, hey, is there already something out there that's working, happening, could be improved, and then see if we can work with that or improve that, et cetera. Good point.
And based on sort of preliminarily looking at what's out there, there are a lot of reentry groups. Some of them are by county, which is as a roundtables, doing a lot of great work. And there are certainly a lot of sort of groups and community organizations. But what we're thinking would make this unique is that sort of almost private, public working together. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Erin Seegers, a youth defender with the Office of the Public Defender. And today the Juvenile Justice Work Group wants to present on essentially step one of a multi-tier long-term proposal that we are working on. We have discovered that in Maryland, there are huge disparities between race and place when it comes to youth in the criminal system. I believe we have a graph, if we could show the graph, that really does show kind of the issues.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I see you trying to communicate with one another. Can we get the clock going? I think that's what you wanted to convey. Yeah, let's get the clock going.
No, we want more time on it.
Okay. Well, go the other way then.
Presenters, the youth, impact everything. So I believe this is just one example. This is the rate of referral, so essentially juvenile arrest. And you can see the huge disparities between race. Those are the green is Black youth and the blue is white youth. But then also the huge disparities between counties. And right here it shows the top 5 biggest counties in Maryland. But even, the other screen shows that as well. So you can see that you don't have to look at it too closely to notice how there's a huge difference between the counties as well as between our white and Black youth in Maryland. And so basically our proposal, step one of our proposal is to get to the bottom of that. Our audience is the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, and they have already been tasked through their RED groups, their racial and ethnic disparities group, to really look at these racial disparities and to study how there are disparate impacts in a few different categories. Again, that's just the arrest and diversion rates. But there's also huge disparities when it comes to school-based arrest, which has already been mentioned today, youth trials and adults. We see these disparities between white and Black youth in several different areas, but particularly between the different counties in Maryland. And again, these RED groups, part of the Governor's Office, they have already been tasked at looking at this a little bit, but we have learned that there's a lot more data and information that we need to really analyze why this is happening and what's driving these huge disparities, what type of practices are positive and need to be implemented uniformly throughout the state, and what practices are really causing these huge gaps that we see. So our proposal is to ask these RED groups to collect more data that targets this specifically and to analyze it in a way so that we can see the practices driving things so that we can improve them. And again, that's kind of step one of a multi-step, multi-tier, long-term proposal that we're working
on. Questions?
I have just one.
We got one over here first, Judge. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess this is scary data, and thank you for presenting it. The thing that it doesn't show, I'm going to give you the second, Judge, is also the massive increase that's occurred just in the last year. I mean, we've gone from 306 kids the day I started, January 31st of last year. We have 387 kids in our various facilities today. It's more than a 25% increase, mostly driven by kids being tried as adults. And it doesn't correspond with changes in crime during that period of time. So it seems like there's a policy decision to lock more kids up and try more kids as adults. And we have to say something about that because almost all of them are Black kids.
Good question. And I just have a comment that I hope that you'll look at the waiver and reverse waiver stats that out there that may show something.
Yes, and we absolutely are, as Secretary Schwally just mentioned, that is the number one thing that is dragging these numbers. So we are spending a lot of time looking at that.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat what the distinct, for the rate of referral and the rate of cases authorized, what those numbers represent, just because they were over there. Sorry. Yeah, I'm a visual person.
So on the left, we have the rate of referral. So that's essentially that if you think of it as a juvenile arrest and the rate of cases authorized petition, that means those are the cases that actually make it to court. So we do see how essentially the ones on the right is diversion. So some counties, for example, in Orange County, they divert more cases than some other counties, but they also arrest much more. And again, one of the things that's just very telling about this graph is if you look at it, we kind of have these circles here. And basically, if you are a Black youth in Prince George's County, the arrest rate is kind of similar, for example, to a Black youth in Baltimore County.
White
youth. Yes, white youth in Baltimore County. So Black youth in print, this is based on like arrests. That shows kind of the differences despite the differences between white and Black, if that makes sense.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much.
Criminal law and sentencing reform.
Hello, I'm Sean Murphy. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Katie Dorian and Judge Alexander Williams, right over there on the criminal law and sentencing reform committee or work group. We have a number of proposals that we're working on. One we presented at the last leadership meeting was relative to the felony murder rule, creating a commission to study that. And do a number of things there. We also have some bail reform. One we presented at the last leadership meeting. But the proposal that we're going to focus on today is the commission to state attorneys and prosecutors' best practices manual that one of our subgroups is going to be working on. The idea and the target of this manual will be the Maryland State's Attorneys Association, prosecutors in Maryland, and the Maryland Judiciary to inform practices that occur. Obviously, prosecutors play a outsized role in criminal justice outcomes, and many of the disparities that we discussed today can be influenced through the prosecutors' charging decisions, discovery practices, advocacy at sentencing, and that is an area that we think needs some attention, and specifically to give guidance as to looking at areas where we can reduce recidivism at the same time as reducing the need for incarceration or the advocacy for incarceration in the courtroom. Obviously, we've all seen the data presented here today. How this would play out is the MEJC would produce such a list of recommendations and best practices and then track data from a variety of sources to see how that plays out. And that's our proposal.
Any questions?
Great idea.
Health and Human Services.
Thank you to the group.
I actually have a slide. So this is the Health and Human Services Committee, and the description of the issue. Dr. Erlanger Turner is a psychologist from Pepperdine University who founded 4 barriers to treatment for African Americans: accessibility, availability, appropriateness, and acceptability. We want to focus on acceptability. 4th factor of acceptability is about cultural mistrust and stigma in the African American community. Over the last couple of years, we have established several commissions and work groups in looking at increasing accessibility to services for people of color. However, there still tends to be a gap. We have several people on our committees who are returned citizens who talk about there's a lack of awareness in the African American community about what services are there, as well as a level of ongoing mistrust. So our recommendation is to establish a public mental health well-being campaign and an app entitled The Green Book of Mental Health Wellness for People of Color. As people know, may or may not know, historically in the United States, there were 28 years of the Green Book, where African American people had to use the Green Book to go and travel to places that were identified specifically for African American people, places that were safe. This app and this public awareness campaign will establish something akin to an Angie's List, where we're looking at we're looking at providers who are culturally sensitive, who can come onto this app and establish their standards, how they're providing culturally sensitive services for African American people. When we talk about African American people can go to this app or get a copy of this book to assess quality services that are trusted and have an established history of trust for providing services to African American people. Here's my slide. Our target audience, we would target the Maryland Health Equity Resource Act that provides funding, grant funding, and I would hope to be able to establish collaboration with Judge Alexander's social justice school, so we could put together software and then maintain this app, this book.
Questions or comments?
Questions?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Law enforcement policies and practices.
Oh, okay. I'm having legislative flashbacks. I was wondering if Delegate Clippinger was in the room. Okay, so I brought my own thing. So we are the law enforcement policies and practices. My co-chairs are right there, Heather Warnken and Phil Pickus. And we have some very ambitious goals. The first is coordinating alternative responder models for community behavioral health crises with folks suffering from mental health crises and reducing the impact or the interaction of law enforcement as a police response to a mental health crisis. The second is enhancing transparency and accountability by increasing compliance with Anton's law, focusing on the production of records in accordance with the law. Although we passed the law, we have yet to see any type of substantial compliance with that law. And also raising awareness and transparency with police accountability boards and administrative charging committees, and having some uniform information distribution regarding those units that have also been developed with Anton's law. And then the third is researching the feasibility of a public-facing database for law enforcement, including data around stops, searches, arrests, interaction with the public, and police misconduct data.
So folks in the community can be empowered to pull up the data and look at where, sort of like a heat map, where are these arrests, where are these interactions? Where is the most misconduct complaints coming out of? What communities are most affected? I will say that we also have some other lofty goals. Particularly, our work group feels very strongly about increasing financial accountability related to police misconduct and budgetary decisions, qualified immunity, and using policing technology and policing. And I will just say that as everybody is sort of learning how to do this, well, building the plane as we fly it is, I think, what folks have said. Our committee is really learning as we go that this is very difficult subject matter to tackle and to raise consensus on. And we feel very strongly about building that consensus. And so I say that these are our objectives, but they are subject to change as we truly build authentic consensus. And one of the ideas that we have, and this is taking a lot longer than we had anticipated when we set out. Our group is very engaged and very committed. We're looking at the opportunity to maybe take a one-day retreat with our work group so we can really get in the room face to face and start developing true consensus. And so these are our initial, and look forward for more. Questions?
I sort of have a two-part question about your data, public-facing database. I know that GoCap or formerly GoCap already has a database, a data dashboard on race-based stops. Can you explain a little bit more about how your proposal would expand or include additional helpful information outside of that?
Well, it's a good question. First of all, I don't think that all agencies are reporting the information that is supposed to be hosted on GoCap. We have yet to find full compliance. Even in Baltimore, that's under consent decree. They are not generating the data that the consent decree requires, as far as we can tell. So that's number one, is that although it's out there, we don't think it's quite adequate. And then number two, our database would look at, for example, some of you might have saw the story in the Banner yesterday about a wrongful conviction that was overturned when police misconduct data that was available was not relayed to the criminal defense attorney. We're litigating those cases all the time. And so this misconduct data should be available to everybody and not just so happens who is the public defender who got your case, who knew about that. And so there should be uniform distribution of misconduct data, of complaint data, interactions with the public. If any of you are familiar with the Invisible Institute in Chicago, they heat map complaints. It's very useful, empowering information for the community to know, and it should not be housed inside one agency in particular. And prosecutors too should also, we should be able to hold them accountable to say, hey, we know you have that information that needed to be disclosed. Any other questions? Yeah.
So let's give another hand of applause for all our presentations. Extremely excited for what we heard today. A lot of great ideas, and a really special thank you for all the work that is clearly evident that is being put into all the proposals. At this time, we will open the floor for any discussions, any questions. This is your opportunity to share or again, ask questions. No questions. We have some deadlines coming up in terms of formal proposals. We're already in June, so those dates are quickly approaching. I do remind you that the proposals that you are putting forth, think of them as the rough draft of what the final report will look like. You are essentially going to be the authors of the report that comes out in January. So as much information, as much detail as you can provide will be great. And use that template as you put forth your formal proposals. You don't need to put out 7. If you have like a hearty, well-developed 3 or 4, that is great. It's really about quality, not quantity. So don't work really hard to get 7. We're looking for the really good, meaty proposals. So focus on that. Quiet group. Yes.
Just for the leadership, tell us about, obviously, great money, lots of, I'm sorry. Just if you could tell us about how you're sustaining momentum in the communities that are very much invested in the work that this body's doing, just sort of what that's looking like from your perspective.
One thing I would say, and again, I would applaud the work groups, and it may be varying levels, but as we heard from one of the work group presenters, where they have 40+ members of the community. Also, later this month, we're going to be hosting, you may want to speak to this because the OPD has led the effort on this, a film screening, so I'll turn it over to that.
So yes, so we are engaging with community. So some of the work groups have done things independently. So we had an event at University of Maryland that was one. Work groups are engaging with other community partners that are outside of the collaborative to gain momentum, but also to gather information in their processes. And also part of it is being part of community. I think it's very important that the community understands why this effort is important. We are a multi-generational group, and some of us are more seasoned, have lived a longer period of time, and understand from where we started. So it's important that we know the history and that we're educating the community about the history. So we will be at University of Baltimore School of Law. Thank you to our partners at UB, where we will be doing the showing of the documentary 13th, and it'll be followed by a panel discussion. Heather Workin will be one of the members of the panel. We also have Davon Love for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, and Chrissy Thornton from Associated Black Charities. So we'll not only see the film, but hopefully we'll get into some great discussion, not only amongst us, but also members of the community, because it's really important that there is an understanding, not only amongst us, but amongst the community as to why this work is important, why we are dedicated to it, and also bring them in and find ways how they can also be part of the efforts that we're taking. So thank you. I did want to perhaps put one member on the spot. We have the benefit of having Judge Freeman with us from the Department of Justice. And Judge Freeman, if you would just take some time and just share with us the work that you are doing and what other opportunities exist for the state of Maryland on the federal level. Surprise. You're always on the ready.
Thank you, Natasha. So as many of you know, I served as a judge here in Maryland for over 20 years. And then about 2.5 years ago, President Biden appointed me to a position at the Department of Justice. The title is ridiculously long, but it's the Director of Criminal Justice Innovation, Development, and Engagement. I'm housed at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is the money arm, basically, of the Department of Justice, where any money that's allocated for criminal justice reform for the states. So even though I'm at the U.S. Department of Justice, everything we do at BJA is related to the states. So all the funding we have is available to state entities, cities, municipalities, community organizations, et cetera. And we really have funding that touches every area of everything that you've been talking about. We have money for mental health. We have money for substance use. We have money for reentry programming, in the corrections. We talk a lot. We have Director Brooks, and we like we really have a vested interest in every single part of the criminal justice system. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be listening to what this commission is collaborative is focusing on. I look forward to, we're in our 2024 cycle right now, so it's difficult to talk about funding right now, but it's the cycle actually will be over very soon for 24, and we are starting to think about 25. So that's definitely discussions that we could have. I'm happy to go to different subcommittees to talk about funding opportunities for 2025. Part of what I do as well is I travel the country for the department. I think in 23, I did over 125,000 miles for the Department of Justice, going to different states like Boston, Massachusetts, and looking at some of the innovations that they're doing. And I'm happy as well to discuss that with anyone who's interested. I've seen many of the programs that Judge Karoum was talking about, the emerging adult detention units and facilities around the states. And, so I really have a nice perspective on what nationally people are doing to make improvements in all the areas that you all have been talking about. So again, I'm very happy to be here and I look forward to being as helpful as I can. Thank you.
And having heard that, are any questions? Closing remarks?
No, I just wanted to, I just want to thank again the work group leaders and the participants. I know that you put in many hours and many days, both during the traditional 9 to 5 workday, and many of you outside of those hours, particularly as we try to welcome participants who are not necessarily members of the collaborative, but we invite their participation. So I want to thank the work groups for what you're doing. Looking forward to seeing the recommendations in the next few days or weeks, and then working with you to refine them, to build them out as well, so that when we report at the end of the year, we've got data to support it. We have best practices that we can point to, and we can really, produce a quality product where then in our advocacy roles, we can work with the different policy decision makers, stakeholders, to get them implemented. So thanks for your work.
And I also want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to my co-chair. Special shout out and thank you to Team OPD who helped set us up here today, and all the technical support. Hopefully I will see many of you on June the 17th. We have a nice sweet partner. Takari Ice Cream is going to is a sponsor, so it will provide us with some special treats. If you are able to attend, please use the QR code to register so we can have an idea of the numbers. And even if you're not sure, it is going to be a great event, so I encourage you to come by. And Christian and Willie will be sending out some more information. Please be mindful of the deadlines in terms of your submissions. And with that, I say again, thank you for being here today, and safe travels. And please return the name plate.
I was on leave for a while, and now just coming back a few weeks ago, so I'm still kind of getting caught up on everything, wanting to make sure classes, trying to feel out, you know, where's the group, the you know. Yeah. Oh, let's get together sometime soon. I'm in Baltimore now, so a little closer to you. Yeah. Yeah.
Now you're at home.
Yeah. So like right on that, right off the country. Yeah. Now you're still Howard.
All right,
You're still, what is your role now? Are you still running in Howard?
Howard County, not the state.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, that's Howard. Might be. Oh. Okay. So will you let us know how we can work? Okay, so we're both casting at minimum. Let us know how we can come testify. What's the status right now?